Hey, Oshio Gaga, everyone. Hello. Welcome to the Fractured Faith podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Hopping. If you're new here, I am a Cherokee lay theologian, Christian mystic, and former pastor. And this is a time and place where we could talk about a lot of the biblical and historical context behind church doctrines, to look at things slightly different and look at things a little bit of broader spectrum, seeing that the basically the way of Jesus is much more mysterious and much larger than sometimes we're taught, especially within U.S. evangelicalism, which kind of gets a lot of press today in the public. And today, though, I actually want to talk a little bit about what is a Christian mystic. Okay, what is a Christian mystic? Is a Christian mystic something I have the kind of describe myself as in various contexts in a lot of my written works as an author? I've written well, those you know, I've written three books actually, two Christian theology books and a third in the business world. I'm currently working on a fourth book, which is actually a contextualized Cherokee theology, Christian Cherokee theology book, as well as an indigenous First Nations kind of Bible study that I'm actually hoping will get published this year. The Cherokee contextual theology one will probably take me a couple more years before I'm done. I got a ways to go on that one a little bit, but I'm kind of diving into that one. I'm also a stomp dancer and well, they're trying to get me to sing. I have. That's definitely something I am not as good about. I can talk all day long about theologies in the Bible, but trying to get me to sing anything is definitely hard. But I do attend stomp dance ceremonies on the traditional space on the Cherokee Reservation, which is definitely kind of an interesting juxtaposition between some of the work I do within the churches and Christology and whatnot. But hey, it is a mystery that I tend to walk in. Hey, that's why I'm a mystic in so many ways. So with that, though, I want to kind of slow down a little bit in this one and kind of talk about what is Christian mystic, what does that mean, and kind of look at it because those terms are such that is definitely very interesting. I get some people who hear the word mystic and they get very, very mad. But like Christians get mad because they say Christians can't be mystics. And then a lot of the mystics get mad because you can't be a Christian and a mystic. And so I kind of end up getting both people mad at me, which that's the story of my life, I guess. But and a lot of times when people hear the word mystic, they're like again kind of the monk up on the mountain, kind of moving around and saying it. It's that super spiritual kind of access to things out there, separate from real world viewpoint. Or they may think of mystic as mystical, being like those Eastern religions or those or that. You know, it's always other there, which is always kind of an odd thing, by the way, is Eastern religions, because Christianity is an Eastern religion. It came from the Middle East, and the America is in the West, but that's a different story on that one. But to that sense, though, when we look at what mysticism really is and kind of looking at that, that really is somebody that is trying to live in the nearness of God. It's not just talking about God, but being transformed by God. So mysticism is not just visions or spiritual fireworks, and it's really the direct participation in the divine life. Now, it does mean that sometimes you do have visions and there is fireworks. You think of Avalon of Teresa of Avalon, or even St. John of the Cross, and some of these mystics, you'll see them having visions or dreams or various things that happen, sensory override instances that happen in their life that kind of really kind of push them to live a certain way. And there have been those within my own life that I've had these, again, these mystical override sensational kind of things that have directed me to go down a path that I probably would not have done before. And there's a lot of times I'm still in the Christian faith because of my interactions with the divine, quite frankly. And that has really kind of propelled me to keep walking in that direction. And that's really that mystical deal, is a direct participation in the divine life. And that could be in, every day, because, I am not just a podcaster and author, but I go to work every day and I have a boss and I have jobs and I have people I do and I have a family and I have all those things you think about in living a quote unquote normal life. and yet I'm also trying to see the interactions of the divine in that life. And there are certain days and seasons that I do this better than others. There are some times where I get caught up with what's in front of me and I miss it. I'm not the most caring individual with a family, friends, whatever else. But then I try to come back and say, hey, I really want this participation in divine life. And so there is ideal of being a mystic is something that's here, but is also coming, right? It's not, you're never fully a mystic. You're just like in some ways you're never really fully a Christian because you are a Christian, you're becoming a Christian, you one day become a Christian. And there's so many layers to what that mean, right? It's like, well, how do I follow God? Well, when I follow the creator, I've been made new. I'm being made new day. I will one someday be made new. I have been saved. I'm being saved, and one day will be made. There is an ongoing relational process within that sense. And it really within that is centered on Jesus. That really comes down to the key point of even what I say Christian mysticism is, because the Christian part is very keen, because you can have mysticism that's removed from Christianity, removed from Jesus and Nazareth, and that's something completely different. And there's mysticism in other different world religions. But as a Christian mystic, I am one that's shaped by Jesus. And maybe I even want to say what's a Jesus-centric mysticism, because even the word Christian has a lot of connotations to it that I wrestle with, as one of my previous episodes from last seasons talks about how that term, I like it, but I don't like it because it's lost a lot of the edge, because it's no longer Christian is supposed to be a Christ follower or one as Christ, little Christ, little girl, referring again back to Jesus of Nazareth. And yet now has actually become more of a political statement or a doctrinal statement or whatnot in U.S. Evangelicals and political arena of 2026, which is always a little bit difficult. But I'm using it in this sense because I don't know of a better way to combine with mysticism besides just Christian, because it does still carry the ideal of Jesus in it. So when we talk about Jesus, Christian mysticism is focused on Jesus, and it is, his crucifixion, but his resurrection, his indwelling, but also the incarnation. It is very much key on the incarnation. You have to think about that piece of how the creator became the created. And in this last episode, we just talked a lot about this, right? How the incarnation was always the goal. It was never a plan B or aftermath. It was the goal, and it continued to be influential in so many places. And that's one of those elements of mysticism, of being able to say Christian mysticism. I gotta make sure I say that is centered on Jesus, the creator. God, creator of heaven and earth, came down and entered into this world, and it's actually made flesh. That is insanely mind-boggling in so many ways. And I think Maximus the Confessor once said, like, that which has been revealed in incarnation is just but a bit of what actually fully happens, right? And I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but in other words, what we know about the incarnation is just a skim, the touch of just the bare thin of what really happened in that incarnation and what all went on to it. And then you have his ministry and life and his crucifixion, his resurrection, his indwelling, the ascension, the Holy Spirit coming and part of us and being part of us. I mean, all of that is just intertwined into this concept of Jesus and part of it. And the ideal of a Christian mystic says that we believe that the creator is revealed most clearly in Christ, not abstract ideals, not doctrine or theologies and stuff, which is not all bad. It's helpful, but God, the creator, is revealed most clearly in Jesus. I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm not a follower of Paul. I'm not a follower of Moses. I'm not a follower of Martin Luther or John Calvin or of John Wimber or anybody you might want to say. Is I really try to follow Jesus of Nazareth, and him to incarnation and crucified and died and resurrected and ascended and all the places, right? That is really where it kind of comes into this one and places and reveal that in the cross, God reveals who he really is. It's the kenosis, or the emptying himself on the cross. And in the cross, he reveals the suffering God, and the fact that the creator dies is amazing. It's just, whew. Yeah, I mean, God dies. I mean, he dies to see Jesus, to see the Father, to see Jesus, to see the Spirit, to see the Father, to see Jesus and the Spirit, to see the Spirit, to see God the Father and Jesus. It's like they're all the Trinitarian intertwined into the nature that's all connected in places. And so we could say it was the day that God died because the Creator died upon the cross, and that's where the world screamed, and the earthquakes happened, and the temple was rent, and people got out of the grave and started walking, and the sun was black. And I mean, just go read Luke, and it's just, blows your mind what was happening at that time, right? I think it's Luke, it might have been Matthew, but the end, the crucifixion, passion was happened. So that's again that kind of the ideal of that Christian mysticism of sitting with thatness of that, right? It's not a I don't know. It's just like that's that mystery, that tension, right? It's sitting and saying, "Hey, we want to be intensive rather than certain. We want to participate in this place rather than control. It's faithfulness over mastery. It's listening instead of proving. It is coming and learning how do we walk in that passion of Jesus' ongoing relational process of journeying to them, even places. It's being okay with not knowing about the mystery. You see in some of my published writings about that as well. Again, the writing, the mysteries and stuff coming in. That's kind of the ideal of Christian mysticism. And then when we think about how that then impacts how we read the scriptures, you guys, some of you who's been kind of listening to this podcast or reading some of my books, the ones published, obviously even more so when they are starting the new ones that will be coming out, because I kind of move more and more this direction as we kind of get into it, is a lot of mysticisms do not treat the scriptures as a rule book or kind of a legal document. It really is treated as a living conversation with people, right? The scriptures are something you must enter it into, pray, wrestle, inhabit it. There's layers to it. I think Origen talks about the layers of scriptures, the literal, the moral, the spirituals, and there's things hitting it. They're in there, right? Now, I don't want to go too far, because I think sometimes mysticism can get into the part where there's like, there's these deep hidden things in there, and if we find the key to interpret it, or there's certain number systems that will then unlock the mysteries of the scriptures, or unlock the mysteries. And I think sometimes that's maybe going too far in that tension of kind of places. I'm like, well, no, because we're not really like we're not. We're not like it's. I don't know. It's like there's mystery, but it's the searching for the mysteries. It is the act of knocking, the act of seeking, the act of looking that we find them. I think this is Peter Rollins right now, which is kind of this Irish philosopher, theologian. He's like, it's the act of it that's actually happening, right? It is going into this one. I think that is really the sense of going. And I do know the Bible, I think it's Psalms, I think talks about Jesus, God being hidden in the depth of the scriptures and into nature, and revealed in the way that you search for him. And I know there's a certain amount of, you got to open your eyes and look, but then we can go too far. And that's that tohi, or balance or harmony. Maybe this is more of my Cherokee side, which is, you got to be okay with the middle, the tension. And if you break that tension, then you're out of balance, out of tohi. And that tension can be, well, if it's too much mystery and we're trying to find that key or unlock that thing, that I have the secret knowledge, well, you've crossed out of that tension. At the same time, if I have the certainty and I know 100% that this is what it is, and this is the literal stuff, and the literal place, and we know 100%, then we've lost that tension, we've lost the balance, and we're out of it, right? And so there's a lot of the read the Bible is kind of holding those things in balance, of where there is a mystery, but there's also been revealed that the message of the Creator has been revealed to us through Jesus of Nazareth in a way. He used to speak to his followers through dreams and visions and prophets, but now he reveals himself to the Creator, as Paul says. And so there's a certain amount of that piece that we have to be a part of that. And that really is that mystic, right? So when we read those texts, it's, what is the passage doing to me? What is it being revealed or concealed? And what needs to die in me to become part of this journey? And it's not a purely spiritual sense, right? This is not just a pie in the sky kind of mysticism, spiritual with no real world. This is real world. I had this great, well, I would say great, but recently had a conversation on Facebook, which is always a little bit scary sometimes when you think about it, because Facebook is definitely an interesting location for people. But in there, I was talking about the acts of recent couple weeks ago. We had this deal with Trump going into Venezuela, and I actually made the comments, and I'm not really want to get too political here, but I have made the comment where I am anti-war and I don't believe in war or violence. And so this is where I lean as a pacifist. And I say lean because I struggle with that, because I realize that inside of me there is a sense that I want violence to be redemptive. I do, but I read the red letters of Jesus, and he dies by us, live by a sword, die by a sword, and that we are to love and bless our enemies and forgive those who harm us. And I can't square that with that violence. So I have to come to this kind of this non violence, kind of more pacifism kind of stance of life. And I had shared some of that online, and I had people, all the people come, like one guy come at me saying, well, that's not practical. That's a nice sentiment, but that's not the real world. That's not the real world. That's out there. And I'm like, no, actually, this is the real world. This is, you think of Jesus. Jesus refused to fight, right? He even told Pilate, I can have 1,000 angels come down and fight this thing, but I choose not to, because I go in kenosis, I lay myself down, I empty myself and lay myself down on the cross, and I humbled. You have this going back to Philippians 2, where he humbled himself even to death upon a cross, upon a tree. And that's where he came in. His followers, he told them not to, and they then went and they lived that, and for the first several hundred years of Christianity, it was inconceivable to be a soldier in the Roman army and be a follower of Christ. Like, they did not see this one. Now, there's a lot to that one, and I grant that there's some of them, because Romans had to sacrifice stuff to them, and there's nuances. Again, I could break this down to, here Jesus had friends that were centurions, and he didn't say anything about being a soldier, or John the Baptist baptized Roman soldiers, and so I get that. But historically, we see that the vast majority of Christians and the Christian leaders, the first several hundred years of the church, they were pacifists, and they did not believe in violence or serving in the military, because that military being a very violent occupation. That's what it is. And they paid that with their death. They had the red martyrdom because they literally died to hold this up, right? And the ideal is like, that's real world places. This is sediments coming into reality. Now, why did they do that? They knew that this was death, it was painful, it was horrible, it was great. But they also held that this is where they see Christ on the cross. God dies, God comes in as a suffering servant of Isaiah to be able to reveal something new and afresh in that sense. And there's a mystery, because that doesn't make sense. How can the sacrifice, crucified lamb be also the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? And it's interesting that it's where in Revelations you see this playing with the John the Revelator between the lamb and the lion, and the lamb and the lion, and which one's sacrificed and which one going. And there's a tension, and there's a mystery, and there's things in there, and that's where the Christian mystic, we hold that in tension, hold this in place, and realizing that what we see in the scriptures and what we see with deals has a real world example. It must influence how we to live Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. There are costs to be mattered with that, even to the cost of death. And that is scary, and that is hard. And I hope to never have to put that to the test, to be, if I'm honest with you. But if it ever does happen, I hope I can make that choice to stay firm, realizing that I do live in the United States, and that it is not likely to be able to put to the test. It tends to be more of a shaming that goes on here than anything else, rather than true life or death. But that's just one example, right? This is one example, and there's other areas of our life where it comes into it. But that just shows you that there's a practicality to being a Christian mystic that does come in play, and that you have to hold that tension, right? And that's where the mystics are okay with the tensions of knowing but not knowing, of paradox, of silence, of figuring out old belief. And that's part of what this whole podcast is, the fractured faith, is that I think as we come into the mystery of God, sometimes our faith gets fractured, but then out of the fracturedness of our faith becomes a mosaic, and the mosaic shines something that's even more beautiful than what was before. And that is, I think, a beautiful, beautiful thing in that one, right? And so that's partly why I'm a Christian mystic, right? It's because I seek to see the divine in everyday life, and I've had experiences of the divine that have said this is something beyond what I can see and understand, and yet at the same time I can pursue theology and I can pursue doctrine and I can pursue church living because they're not mutually exclusive, right? To be a Christian mystic is not to be anti-church. We have many of us that were pastors and nuns and bills. I myself was a church planner and a pastor for a dozen years, 15 years, depending on how you count it. Again, how do you count it? Well, I mean, that's another deal, right? But I was intimately involved in running of churches and places. I still am serving in the local church and in several capacities. I actually teach youth, and I'm on a treasury board of a church, and I'm involved in things that are in the local church, right? So being a Christian minister does not mean being anti-church. It also does not mean anti-doctrine, right? They just simply being a Christian means it refuse to confuse doctrine with God. This goes back to this podcast that we looked at different doctrines and theologies, and we're saying, well, what's the ramifications of this one? What is the historical and the biblical evidence for this one? Why is we there? Why is this such a big deal for certain people? And then understanding that that is our human understanding of what we think the divine is actually talking to us or sharing with us, but it's not the divine. We're not obsessed with supernatural experiences, even though they do happen. And I think that's a big one because I did grow up a lot of my life in kind of the Pentecostalism, charismatic world. And then when I was part of the Vineyard Christian Fellowship as a pastor, there was a lot of supernatural experiences that come to it, right? But a lot of the Vineyard was tried to be in the radical middle of that one and be very realistic in that, which was great, actually. It was phenomenal. It was partly why I hung out with him so long. And so, yeah, we've seen some great things, but being a mystic is not just pursuing the spirituality. It's not running off to the conference or running off to this pastor or this leader or this place and searching and searching and searching and searching for that one. Again, you broke tohi, you broke balance, you broke the tension, you broke the paradox. Things do happen. I mean, there has been things that have come in my life, dreams and visions and events and stuff, supernatural things, which I can only, I mean, some of which I can talk about, some of which I can't. But being a Christian mystic does not mean that you have to be obsessed with that. It's just, or to say that you're indifferent to justice suffering. Like, no, mysticism actually says it does. Again, it leads us back into a fuller engagement because, again, we are looking at Jesus as our example and our place and live. This is not about reading the Gospels as a doctrine or a theology or as a logical deal. This is living it to be able to say, how can I then apply this and live this one in that paradox of knowing that I am saved but I am being saved and one day will be saved and I will come into it, right? And it's all of that compassion, right? Teresa of Avila once said, he said, Christ has no body now but yours. Right? It's like, I am the body of Christ. I have to share and show and move it, right? So being a Christian mystic is really pushing into that. Now, where did it show up in writing? This is what I want to kind of call out because I've called myself a Christian mystic, and sometimes look at my writings. Like I said, I've written 2 books. I've written the Here and Not Yet, What is Christian Theology and Why Does It Matter? And then I've written the book called The Mystery, the Way, and the Journey. And that one really, I think, is more mystical than the other, if I think so. But in these things, any themes of those, and in some of my papers that I've started to write from a scholarly level, there's some things that kind of pulling into it, right? Of how walking into it. So you really is almost a refusal to, again, to collapse the already not yet, this ideal that the kingdom of God has come. It is coming, one day will come, or salvation is, I call this inaugurated, negative astrology or inaugurated atonement, which is, again, this thing that we are saved one day, we're being saved, and one day we'll be saved. It is our conversion or our discipleship or purification, and then one day our theonosis or our when we come into heaven. So glorification is where I'm looking for, so glorification, and like that's all intention, and you see that tension in my writings. You see the willingness to let that mystery remain mystery, a relational salvation. This is where even I talked about how I don't really see salvation as a legal message or think that it really is a relational sense of walking with Christ and walking with him and building upon that one. And there's some really cool stuff again coming out in some of my future writings that kind of flesh that out in a lot of ways, especially from a Cherokee or Cherokee viewpoint. I'm really excited to whenever that gets written. I'm really excited to share that with you because definitely some cool thinking in my head coming over there, right? I do tend to, you see this with story. Like when I wrote my Here Not Yet, I'm really into like, this is the story behind what's happening. This is where people are going to, because we have to understand that and that area to come from that one. And like I said, coming up my newer work here, I'm really exploring how land and creation, or they're not just backdrops, they really are active participants in the life of Jesus, in the faith, in our life, or whatever else, right? Our non-human relatives are very much right. Our four-legged relatives, our winged relatives, our scaled relatives, insect relatives, or stone relatives, or tree. Those are part of who we are, and actually joining and participating in what we're going at, and understanding that healing is in restorative deals, and that Jesus alone comes in and invites us to participate in them. So there's a lot of those themes in there that are coming out, that Jesus is not absent, that the faith is not about grasping God, but learning how to walk with God. So you see some of that coming in. So hopefully that will come out more and more, not just my writing, but also in the podcast as I go through it. So a lot of cool stuff. But that's mysticism to me. That's mysticism, Christian mysticism, more specifically, that I like to hold in tension, that mystery, that faith, that journey, that paradox, that insane look to be at Jesus and looking for that divine, and this idea that we are being made and transformed into his image in so many ways, right? So that really is how I see Christian mysticism. That's why I would kind of explain it. Now, mysticism does not mean a better Christianity. This is one faith among others. There are some people who follow Jesus through doctrine and clarity, and we need those people. We need those people who understand that, and that clarity and that certainty. We need people who see, follow through justice and action, or tradition and structure, contemplative and attentive, right? Those are other valid faiths, and we need each other, right? I need those people to push back on me sometimes to be able to say, hey, Joshua, you're kind of getting a little bit out there. You need to pull back, right? I need to stay within the balance of Tohi rather than being unbalanced. So I need my sisters and my brothers and my relatives to be able to kind of pull me back sometimes whenever I might start going too far off that path, through whatever means of going in it. So that's really the beautiful thing about Christianity, the beautiful thing about mysticism. You can hold that in tension in so many ways. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys in ways, and realizing that Christian mysticism does have a long history within the faith. Again, my man, John the Elder, the Gospel of John, the First John, I love First John. He says, this is what we've seen. This is what our hands have touched. This is what our eyes have seen. Like there's a sense of like, this is what we proclaim to you concerning the Lord Jesus. Like, boom, this is a guy that is a little mystical in his nature, but he also is really rooted in the incarnational faith, because he's like, this is what I saw. This is what I've done. And there's so much times even like, hey, I've seen stuff, I've experienced stuff, and this is how I changed my life in so many ways. So hopefully that kind of understands, anyway, unpacks a little bit of what it means to be a Christian mystic as opposed to just being a mystic or just a Christian. Again, lots of paths, lots of mystery, lots of paradoxes. And so hopefully that was helpful. And again, I just thank you guys so much as we kind of wrap up today, this episode and everything else. Like, follow, subscribe. That's always helpful for me to be able to do it. Share this with other people. If you have any comments or questions or even topics, let me know, and we'll be able to go from there. So please, you guys, as always, we say goodbye, or we don't really say goodbye. We tell you we meet again. We don't have a word for goodbye in Cherokee. We say Dona Daga Ai. Take care, guys.